Welcome everyone to our Active Energy Precincts webinar. We'll just give people a few minutes to join. I can see the numbers climbing, so we'll just give people a few minutes to connect. Great, thanks for joining us here today. I'd like to first acknowledge the lands on which I'm speaking on today and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. I pay my respects to the people of the Kulin Nations on whose traditional estates I speak on today, to their elders past and present. I'd like to acknowledge other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us today. So good afternoon. I'm Priya, the project lead for the Active Energy Precincts project. Thanks a lot for joining us today for this update on Active Energy Precincts. I guess a few items about the webinar, the structure. It is being recorded, so you'll be able to access the recording after the event through our project partners and Monash University websites. And you'll be able to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A feature. You should hopefully have a little Q&A bubble down the bottom of your Zoom screen, which we'll try and respond to you via the chat function, or also put it to our panel at the Q&A section at the end of this webinar. So we've got a fair bit of content to get through today. So, and as I mentioned, we've got some great panelists joining us as well. We'll be providing an update on the project and take you through, I guess, an example of the concepts we are developing and the process that we're following to do that. We'll then be joined by the fantastic team we have in the project carrying out community engagement. We'll take you through the process that's been followed to allow us to develop the designs that we're looking at and progress on the project objectives. We're also today fortunate to be joined by our council partners from Yarra Ranges, Wodonga and Surf Coast, who'll be able to provide us their perspective. And rounding out today's session, we've got the insights into the technology on microgrid systems by Mitch O'Neill, who's the principal consultant at Grids. And then, as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A session and the next steps in the project. So just a bit of a recap for those who are joining us for the first time on the project. I guess what the Active Energy Precincts project is trying to do is essentially demonstrate how microgrid systems can deliver energy resilience whilst reducing base costs for people, and also transition us to 100% renewable energy systems. We're trying to develop this approach in a repeatable and scalable manner so that we can assist other communities in that process. This is building on Monash University's net zero journey, which began almost 5 years ago. And we've learned a lot in that time, and we're keen to translate a lot of those learnings and the pains that we've gone through to help communities on their own realise their own energy objectives. So in this project, we're lucky to be collaborating with Birdwood Energy, who are renewable and energy storage specialists. And they're bringing the commercial expertise to this project to assist us in that development. We're, of course, also supported very strongly by our local government partners in Surf Coast, Wodonga and the Yarra Ranges. So, as I mentioned, the 3 different regions that we're working in, we've identified 2 precincts in each of these regions, and in a total of 6, where microgrid systems could benefit the community. Each of these local government areas has their own unique circumstances and energy priorities. For example, Surf Coast has recently announced a climate emergency and is advancing on their own net zero journey. Wodonga is one of the fastest growing economic regions in Victoria, and reliability and cost is critical to that growth. And Yarra Ranges, of course, has suffered quite a few of the recent natural disasters with bushfires and some of the significant storm events, where resilience is now a really key focus for energy systems in that area. It's because of these unique circumstances that the project is taking a community-led approach to try and understand what each community's priorities are around energy. Understanding this is critical to allow us to develop those microgrid systems and tailor them, and also identify the commercial models that will allow them to become operational as we move forward. So in this project, we're looking at 3 drivers: net zero, resilience, and cost, and understanding how each can assist the community in their energy goals. So if we look at each of these from a project perspective, the net zero area, obviously renewable energy and emissions is pretty self-explanatory. But then we have things like electrification opportunities in the community, such as heating, cooling, cooking and transport. And with each of these elements, both renewables and the electrification, it's also important to understand the time horizons of these elements. So an example of that is understanding the community appetite for things like electric vehicles, and then how maybe government initiatives could support that and when those specific activities could occur. So that all needs to be fed into the model that sits behind the work that we're doing to help us tailor those systems. If we look at resilience, the resilience driver, this can mean about providing support to the community during a resilience or natural disaster event. And so, for example, that could look like providing a staging area for the community, providing food and showers and the ability to charge phones. And from a project perspective, it's really understanding or quantifying that in terms of energy, so we can build that into the system. Resilience can also mean the ability to ride out network issues, such as short outages and reliability issues such as brownouts, which can have significant economic impact. So cost is always a consideration when we're looking at these systems. And in essence, in this project, the cost implications are: how can these systems generate new income, and also simultaneously look at lowering base costs. There's obviously a few details to that, but that's the essence around the cost driver. So I'd like to take you through an example to make this a bit more tangible. What you're looking at here is the primary hub at Healesville. And the model that we have adopted is essentially a hub and spoke model, and this being the primary hub that we're considering. So being in the Yarra Ranges, resilience is a key priority for the community. So if we talk through this example, the buildings that you can see shaded in purple are community buildings. And this forms our base scenario where these buildings will have solar infrastructure as well as battery infrastructure. And the first step is really to understand what can one building provide the community during a resilience event, and understand the kind of assets that could be sized and installed there to do that. So that's nothing too complex, and not a microgrid or a complex energy system by any means. The next step really then is to expand that to the adjoining community buildings. And understand the assets that could then be working together during that resilience period. This then starts raising questions or points around can the network facilitate these buildings operating during an outage? And that means, can they be islanded? Are there regulatory implications from doing so? So these are some of the questions that we'll need to answer through this process and ultimately provide for the community. We then, in this process, we expand it to incorporate the adjoining buildings in the hub. And in this case, it's a commercial site, which is a shopping centre. And this shopping centre can have its own resilience requirements, for example, running refrigeration and freezers and lighting to allow access for the community and also to keep stock. So once that is understood, it's really about expanding the asset options for this hub. For example, there's a large car park region there that could accommodate a solar canopy. It could also accommodate a larger battery system, which would then, in combination, provide a greater resilience relief for the community. There's also other infrastructure such as EV charging that could be then brought into the mix. So again, this raises the similar questions around network implications and the regulatory implications, but it also starts bringing into question commercial requirements around these sort of arrangements. So we then do this at multiple hubs. So we carry out the same process at other hub sites that we've identified, essentially to provide a comparison between the hubs and try and identify the optimum hub location for the community. We then look at how small business and residential participants could then benefit from this system in that hub and spoke model. This process or model that we build then becomes repeatable and can be applied to each precinct that we're working in. And the process then allows us to start teasing out some of those questions in the regulatory, commercial sort of side of things and allow us to, I guess, finally deliver something for the community that answers the questions in the feasibility study. And that feasibility study, in terms of an outcome for the community, will have concept designs for each of the precincts. And the concept designs will consist of, technical information such as equipment sizing, location, connection options for assets and things like that. There'll be commercial considerations such as ownership structures that the community would need to understand to progress this. Of course, the regulatory implications that we've identified, and also the financial considerations that underpin the system, such as cash flows and operating costs. And the project also will also demonstrate how each of the community systems would operate to meet their requirements, utilising the infrastructure that's been installed, and also visualize that energy use in the precinct. That's ultimately the overall aims of the project. So to do this, we've sort of had quite wide consultation with the community. We started with a very casting the net out wide, so to speak, and we worked with councils and local energy groups to identify those precincts. And then our community engagement team tailored the process for each community to allow us to start collecting data, both quantitative and qualitative data from key sites within the precincts and from the community in general. This data then flowed into some of that concept development, so similar to the one that I've just taken you through for Hillsville. That process has been done for each of the 6 precincts. And that brings us to the next step that we're just about to take, which is about meeting with community representatives in focus groups and testing some of those concepts and starting to get some detailed feedback to help us shape those concepts. So I'd like to bring in our great community engagement team to talk you through the process that they've been working on. And with that, I'll throw over to Amy, Karen, and Biget to come on and have a chat.
Thanks, Priya. So hi all, my name is Amy and I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Officer for Yarra Ranges for the AEP project. Online with me for this section is Biget from Wodonga and Karen from Surf Coast. The three of us form the locally based Stakeholder Engagement Officers in each of the local government areas that were built into the AEP project team. Today I'm going to quickly run you through our shared stakeholder engagement approach for the three LGAs before each of us detail some of the localised project findings we've found in each of our communities. But before I begin, on behalf of the three of us stakeholder engagement officers, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which all of our AEP study areas are based. So once the two study sites in each of the three local government areas were selected, we started having one-on-one meetings with key stakeholders, both community reps and individuals from larger commercial sites in our towns to explain the project and gauge their interest in participating. Advice and guidance from our local energy groups and council reps have been key from the onset of this process, as they were vital in helping us identify the large energy users and key community facilities in our study areas that could form part of that microgrid concept that Priya was talking about. These one-on-one meetings between the project team and key stakeholders have been a truly valuable process, as they have shaped our understanding of the key energy priorities that the different users in our 6 study areas have. So these were overwhelmingly centred around those priorities that Priya mentioned around community energy solutions that support energy resilience, cut energy costs and help us reach net zero. And community members have been really willing to give some of their already stretched time to help us build this understanding, with majority of them willing to share their energy usage data for their respective sites over the next 6 or so months to inform our microgrid modelling further. These conversations we've had with a range of commercial and industrial sites and community and council reps have also been vital in helping us identify the locations to deploy the batteries that could act as the hub for our microgrids. So from here, we looked at engaging with residents and small business owners more broadly. This was conducted through a survey that was circulated by various means in each of our study locations to help us further understand those community energy priorities. This survey, although taking a bit more of an indirect form of engagement, has been a valuable process in helping us identify and understand the interest of community members in participating in a range of related activities, either on their own properties or as part of a wider community project like these microgrid studies. So for example, whether respondents were interested in installing batteries on their own homes or expanding their solar arrays by buying green power and a couple of other options. And the survey results have further reiterated those energy priorities around resilience, energy costs and net zero. Helpfully, it has also showed us what educational material could be produced by the project team in collaboration with other community groups to understand the options that our communities have, both in regards to their private individual actions, but also those activities related to these microgrid studies. So now we are at the exciting part of preparing for the next phase of our stakeholder engagement that will be centred around exploring the microgrid concepts like the one Priya just showed that we are currently forming based off the input we've already received. And we plan to run 2 community workshops in each local government area, one in late 2022 and one in early 2023. So keep an eye out for that. The first one will be focused on exploring the concept design for the local microgrid, providing or getting some more input on those energy priorities, and also looking at or exploring what commercial models could be potentially suitable for our local considerations. And a range of focus group meetings with local representatives leading up to these workshops will help us ensure community members have the information they need to make informed input into the microgrid modelling, and to also help us design the workshop in a way that might or that should facilitate meaningful engagement. So although the three of us have shared a similar engagement approach, the three local government areas have understandably had really interesting and different results when looking at our community energy priorities and project findings to date. So before I finish up, I'm going to quickly detail some of the findings from the Yarra Ranges, and then I'll pass over to Birgit and then Karen to share some of their insights. So for Yarra Ranges, our findings have so far truly reflected the lived experiences of our community members in both our two study areas in Hillsville and Yarra Junction. Our local government area has recently been heavily hit by extreme weather events, specifically in June of 2021, with the storms being the worst we have kind of ever experienced. With on the one night, we had 177 properties damaged, 76 of them deemed uninhabitable since. We had tens of thousands of trees down, roads blocked, communication and internet down for weeks. And to add to all of that, we were in the middle of a COVID lockdown, which added a layer of complexity to it all. So our local findings with this project have really reflected this lived experience, with energy resilience being the #1 priority for almost every larger commercial site in town and community facility, and our residents and small business owners in the survey responses. And it has also shaped our thinking around where we've placed our batteries, being at locations that are seen as community relief centres, with guidance from Council's emergency management team. With regards to the survey, similar thoughts and processes. We had 51% of our respondents having experienced major disruptions due to power outages, with the one-on-one meetings and other community outreach events identifying that this had impacts on employment and education, with not being able to work from home, and then impacts on services such as grocery stores and banks and loss of stock and everything that comes with that. And interestingly, our respondents and larger stakeholders are taking a multi-pronged approach to improving their own resilience. At the residential level, already half of our survey responses already had solar, and everybody who responded were interested or had planned to install a battery on their private property, which is exciting. And this is a trend we're seeing with our larger commercial sites and community facilities in the two towns, with many of them already having solar, looking at installing batteries or generators, and wondering how they could be a part of a wider community project to support resilience more broadly. So our findings to date have really centred around that resilience priority, and we all hope that this project will detail what a more energy resilient localised precinct with this microgrid could look like in reality, and how this could relate to helping everybody cut their costs with associated to energy use, and help us reach net zero as soon as possible. So I think that's it from me, and I'll pass over to Birgit to talk about Wodonga.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everyone, and I'd especially like to thank everyone from Wodonga who's joined us today. Great to have you along. And if you're watching the recording, that's great too. I joined this project in June. Michelle Croker was in the role initially, and she started the conversations that Amy has outlined and met with various council business units. There was a lot of enthusiasm from the economic development and the assets and the sustainability units. And so that's where Michelle sort of made her start. She also met with businesses and community organisations, and where businesses had capacity because of everything else that was going on post-COVID, as Amy said, there was good support for this concept, and the community and environment groups are also really keen to see action on this in Wodonga. The local priority that came out of those discussions initially was really about reducing electricity costs. And then from the survey that we all did, the respondents told us that they were really interested in learning more about and improving their understanding of microgrid possibilities. So again, that speaks to the education piece that Amy has already talked about. So we have had, while we've had different results across the board, we've had consistency in the sorts of things that people are looking for. And the local priorities from the survey were that the community and businesses that responded to that survey were much more focused on wanting to play their part in emissions reduction and again, the resilience for when things go wrong in the community. And Wodonga is located centrally, surrounded by councils that have had in the past significant natural disasters such as bushfires. So we know all about it up this area. I would also reiterate what Amy found, and that is that the role of the enthusiastic and interested locals are vital for this project. It's already been important because they've shaped the concepts that the team's working on, and it will continue to be so that the project takes up the new energy models that the community wants. You know, there's lots of variations on what the team can design for these concepts, and there seems to be a lot of interest and support for the community having a strong voice in shaping that. So I'm really looking forward to meeting all those people with an interest in this topic at our forthcoming events and using their input to shape what's going to be happening in Wodonga as the project progresses. So I look forward to seeing you then. And I'll hand over to Karen.
Thanks, Birgit, and thank you, Amy. So as you've just heard from Amy and Birgit, the engagement story for Surf Coast is a similar one. And I'd particularly like to start today by acknowledging Wadawurrung people and Gulingjung and Galketiya people of the Eastern Maar as traditional custodians and protectors of the land that I'm speaking to you from. I'd also like to acknowledge, as we've just heard, the volunteers in our community, and not just for their work, but it's the passion and the commitment to this just energy transition, as big or as small as that might be, that I really am able to draw inspiration, and the energy for the project has come through. So I'm representing Surf Coast Energy Group, and through Surf Coast Energy Group's contacts and connections, we identified our main host battery sites and many of our smaller business connections. But Surf Coast Energy Group is a member of a larger alliance of community energy groups, the Barwon Region Alliance for Community Energy, or BRACE. And it's through BRACE that we've been able to show other communities what's possible and talk about this microgrid project. And I think our reach might even have extended to Omeo today. So lots of people are starting to hear about the sorts of work that community can influence. And this project is a bit of a lighthouse for that. We've also had enormous help and support from many community groups in spreading the word. Surfers for Climate here have been particularly proactive supporters and have given this project a real platform to actually plan our work from. So it's this willingness and passion of some of the leaders in the small to medium business area that's also really helped us. I'd like to call out companies like Rip Curl, Hill Bilby, Lawn Food Works, Stribling Reserve, and entities such as the Sands and the Great Ocean Road Hospital. These small businesses and medium-sized enterprises have also seen the need for the transition and have really engaged with their communities and come to the table, so that we're drawing together this collective momentum to help Monash plan the modelling approach. The people of Surf Coast Shire Council have also been willing and passionate about contributing to the project. And following on from the Surf Coast Shire's brave declaration of a climate emergency, Council's leadership in the project has made for easy collaboration between the community, the project team and the council. And I think Lauren will probably tell you a little bit more about that. Both Birgit and Amy touched on the community survey that we undertook also here in the Surf Coast. And I'd just like to give you a few headlines from that. So here in Surf Coast, emissions reduction was by far the highest priority driver for our respondents, but community resilience also came out fairly strongly. Power outages caused a minor inconvenience for over 71% of respondents, and major disruption for over 11%. And a lot of that was down in the lawn area, where brownouts are a particular issue, especially for small businesses. People also gave us an idea of the range of information needs. So as Amy touched on, we've now got a really good handle on what types of information, forums, workshops, information to bring to people on how to balance the carbon cost of installing panels with environmental solutions and emission reduction. So this is also an added benefit that's come from this project. And over 85% of our respondents said they were keen to participate in shaping the energy solutions. So that's super exciting for the next stage, which is our community workshops that Amy mentioned. So our next steps, as Priya mentioned earlier on, plan for the workshop, the 2 workshops, one towards the end of this year and the other in early next year, where we'll discuss concepts that have been developed so far in more detail. And for us, working out what the Surf Coast community wants with the outcomes of this opportunity. So thanks, Priya.
Thanks, Karen and Amy and Birgit. Thanks for that, providing that insight into all the hard work you've been doing on the ground and making us, allowing us to progress on this project as well as we have. Next, we've got our council partners from Surf Coast, Wodonga and Yarra Ranges. So who are going to provide us, I guess, their context and how local governments are getting involved in these projects. So I'd like to call on Lauren Watt from Surf Coast and Julian Guess from Yarra Ranges and Robin Nicholas to join us. And Lauren, I'll throw to you to introduce yourself first to the audience.
Thanks, Priya. I'm not sure if my video is working there, but hopefully you can all hear me. So hello, everyone. I'm dialing in today as well from Wadawurrung country in Torquay. So I'd just like to acknowledge Wadawurrung people as the traditional owners of this beautiful place and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So as Priya said, my name's Lauren Watt. I coordinate the environmental sustainability team at Surf Coast Shire. And gosh, there's so many opportunities and benefits to highlight with this project. And so I'll speak about the from Surf Coast's perspective in particular. As Priya and Karen mentioned earlier, Surf Coast declared a climate emergency in 2019. And we've since developed our climate emergency response plan and also explicitly incorporated both climate mitigation and adaptation strategies into the council plan for Surf Coast. So there's really a great appetite for projects like this in the Surf Coast, and it was nice to hear Karen speak of how that has eased her role in engaging the community here. So our councillors are really engaged in considering climate change, and this is obviously reflected in council's adopted climate commitments. I know some of our councillors are tuning in today and they're keenly following this project. And ultimately, this is a reflection of our community. We're really fortunate here to have quite an engaged and environmentally focused community here on the Surf Coast. So the drivers for being involved in this project from both council and community are around emissions reduction and mitigating climate change. As Karen touched on with the survey respondents, that was by far the number one priority. But also resilience and climate adaptation. Large parts of the Surf Coast Shire are recognised as some of the most fire-prone areas in the world. So building that energy resilience in our communities is also really important. So this project really helps us to bridge two critical gaps that exist for us and probably most other councils. Firstly, it provides the mechanism to develop the detailed, costed and modelled business case that is required in support of any serious funding applications. It really helps us bridge that gap between microgrid concepts and how to make them happen in a way that responds genuinely to community needs. Partnering with Monash University, Birdwood and Surf Coast Energy Group here and their wealth of expertise in this area, through this funded project, it really brings the resources that council is otherwise limited to progress these resources. And secondly, it provides a means by which council can connect in closely to the community on this topic. So the inclusion, I really want to highlight that inclusion of the local community engagement resources as a really explicit part of this project. It's an invaluable aspect, and I think it really sets it up for success. and this confluence of those three important ingredients, the funding, the expertise, the local engagement, is one that Surf Coast Council really gratefully acknowledges. It's also wonderful to be sharing the journey with our colleagues in Yarra Ranges and Wodonga as well. That really brings even more depth to the learnings that this project brings us. And as Karen said, positions this as a bit of a lighthouse project for others to learn from. So yeah, we're really excited to be involved and to see where it takes us in progressing our net zero and resilience objectives together with our Surf Coast community. I'll leave it there. I'm sure Julian and Robin have got much more to add from their local government areas.
Great, thanks so much, Lauren. Robin, Nicholas from Wodonga, I'd like to call on you, if that's okay. Next.
Thanks very much, Priya. My name's Robin Nicholas. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for Wodonga Council, and like Lauren was indicating, we're very, very grateful to be part of this project. Currently within Council, we're rewriting our Climate Change Adaptation Action Plan and running many energy efficiency projects, so the project fits in quite well. I'm not sure whether many people are aware of what Wodonga is. So basically we're 2 cities, 1 community. We are closely linked with across the border with Albury, about 900,000 residents, 40,000 of those are Wodonga residents, and we're often described, as Priya said, a regional growth area. So we're well placed for industry because we have quite a lot of competitively priced commercial industrial land, so a lot of businesses, and a great network between Melbourne, Canberra and Sydney. So we're very well placed for our business investment as well. Albury-Wodonga is probably classed as around about the 20th largest city in Australia, and we're surrounded by many natural beauties like the hills and our waterways. So Wodonga Council is probably considerably smaller than the other 2 councils. So we got a few more steps of learning to go through. But we do have in our council plan 5 priority areas that link really well with this project. And the key one of that is a sustainable and looking forward. So we have quite a few improved energy efficiency projects for our council, and that has reduced our costs and our emissions considerably. The highest contributor to greenhouse gas in our region for both community and council operations is electricity, so it's a key one for us. And that's our improvements so far have led to about a 30% reduction in emissions. So we're quite grateful for projects like this because it is going to considerably assist with that. The appetite for in our community for a project like this is very strong. A lot of our community groups, and we're quite grateful for their contributions in assisting with that, has been very helpful. Thanks, Priya.
Thanks, Robin. And last but not least, Julian from Yarra Ranges.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Karen, from earlier. So I'm talking from my home in Warburton on Wurundjeri country, and I also extend my respects. We worked on a livable climate plan that was unanimously endorsed by councillors in August 2020, which marked a significant piece of work for us. And we're very proud of that. So if you have a chance, please look on our website to have a look at the livable climate plan. And one of the interesting factors in that plan, we talked about co-benefits. So it's not just about reducing councils' greenhouse emissions, but it's also looking at what other benefits could there be out in the community. And I think this is where this resilience factor comes into play. You know, what can we do with renewable energy that reduces our greenhouse gas emissions, but also gives other benefits to the community? A couple of years ago, we embarked on our first battery energy storage projects, and we established 3 65 kilowatt hour batteries in 3 of our emergency relief and recovery centres, and those projects were finished off in the early part of last year. And that's quite significant for us because we always realised that bushfires, being the main threat, could come at us at any summer. I certainly lived through the 2009 Black Saturday bushfires, and having those places available were really important for community. With that in mind, we set about, with the help of a federal government grant, to put some battery storage into the 3 of those facilities. And lo and behold, a few months later, when the June 21 storms hit, one of those centres was activated as an emergency relief and recovery centre, which was sort of good, but also gave us some learnings. So the community centre that got activated in Yarra Glen operated for several days, and the battery didn't dip below 53%. So that was a success story. However, at the other 2 centres, unfortunately, because there was no sun shining at the time, those centres that weren't activated as an emergency relief and recovery centre did have their batteries drained. And it really occurred to us, well, really, these systems are great, but there needs to be a little bit more. And this is where a microgrid can come in. If we've got more renewable resources available, those battery systems could, in theory, keep going for longer, particularly in the middle of winter when the sun doesn't shine much, or even during a bushfire period where there's a lot of smoke and haze in the atmosphere, which would reduce the amount of solar available. So we thought resilience was a key factor, and Amy said earlier that that was shown in the surveys and in the one-on-one discussions that she's had with our community. And we're pretty excited about microgrids, particularly where we can help our communities keep the lights and power on and keep those essential services running. And I think that's all I want to say, really. So I'll hand that back to you, Priya.
Thanks, Julian. And yeah, thanks to our council partners for providing that insight. I think, council play a very important role in these kinds of projects and systems getting up, and providing that critical link between industry and the community. And I guess I thought it would be interesting for our audience as well to understand the perspectives and the challenges that you all face in the different parts of Victoria. From a project perspective, I just thought it'd be interesting to just throw a few questions out. And Robin, I might start with you. You mentioned you were, I guess, compared to the other councils, you're a lot smaller in size. I mean, the team that is mainly being you for most of this project that I've been involved with, and it's only just starting to expand. What's the importance, or how important has it been being like our project, having a resource like Birgit and Michelle before her, being able to support the activities that are happening on the ground?
Certainly, Priya. Having that local connection with a local people builds trust and makes it much easier for a project like this to come into the community. If you came in without that connection, there wouldn't be as much trust or as much buy-in with that. And I think also joining with the councils, local government has that closest connection with community, so it makes a big difference. So, and the importance of this project has been well outlined by everybody. It's going to make a big difference.
That's great. And Julian, I had one for you that popped into my head as you were speaking. I know you're looking at similar studies in other parts of Yarra Ranges, and part of this project, we're obviously trying to create a repeatable process. And do you feel like this has provided council some, more tools and methodology with that approach?
Yeah, you're right, Priya. So we on the back of this, so in the more rural areas, there's 3 large towns in Yarra Ranges, so Yarra Junction and Hillsville we've already spoken about, but there's another one that was actually outside of the requirements for the AEP project, and that is Monbulk. And late last year, another federal government funding became available called the Preparing Australian Communities Fund. And as part of that, we are more or less replicating what we're doing with AEP to the town of Monbulk. So that project is just about to kick off. Amy and I have done some initial engagements with community renewable energy groups and township groups as well. And that project will be kicking off fairly soon. It does have a little bit of a difference to AEP in that the hub that we're looking at, one of the buildings doesn't currently have solar and batteries, so we're looking at putting solar and batteries on this. It's actually a pavilion, a recreation pavilion, and potentially trying to physically connect to another building on the same title as well. So we don't know whether we can do that yet, but that will be part of the study. So that's a resilient communities project that Amy and I will be working on with Monash and Birdwood. At the same time, we have a state government study as well, looking at network resilience, and that's looking at 24 townships across Victoria. And lo and behold, 6 of those townships fall within Yarra Ranges. So we're doing a lot of work, particularly with AusNet, the local distributor, to look at how we can either form microgrids in the future across precincts or just provide more energy backup to specific buildings. So that work is going on at the moment, and AusNet will be reporting back to the state government in a month or two's time. So that's quite exciting work happening at the same time as the Yarra Junction, Hillsville and Monbulk projects.
So lots of activity.
Yeah, keeps us busy.
Great, thanks, Julian. I just was going to touch on, Lauren, you mentioned that ability to, I guess, work with council counterparts and cross-pollinate some of the ideas and activities. I guess just a question is that something that happens often? I guess not being, in local government itself, and maybe some of the audience members, like, is that something that is easily done, or is it, projects like this, when they're looking at very specific activities, how does that benefit the three of you?
Yeah, good question, Priya. I think we are seeing more and more of this kind of collaboration across councils with climate action, and through things like the greenhouse alliances in Victoria, for example. But I think this project is a really good example, as you say, like sort of getting really quite specific. A lot of the other collaborative type projects that we have been involved in are much more broad, and being able to really dive deep on the microgrid concepts and understanding different aspects from the other council areas is so valuable. Yeah, it's this project, I think, very much with the specific nature of it, brings that depth of understanding for us here at Surf Coast, and being able to learn from the different experiences, like with Yarra Ranges, having gone through that extreme weather event. Having that recent experience and working closely with those with Julian and others at Yarra Ranges is really valuable in bringing positioning us better for when we experience similar events as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think unfortunately those events are probably more likely, as we've seen in the last few months. So,
exactly.
Yeah, well, thanks to the three of you for providing those insights. The next part of our webinar, I wanted to invite Mitch O'Neill from Grids, who's the principal consultant there. And Mitch has conducted a bit of a tech review for the project to try and understand, I guess, the different vendors in the market at the moment and the functionality that they provide to allow the systems that we've been talking about to operate. So Mitch, I'll throw over to you if you don't mind taking us through a bit of the work you've done.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Priya. So yeah, I was asked by Monash to do a technology review, which is really looking at what kind of technologies are out there that help support microgrid projects and implement them. Really, what we were hoping to do with this is kind of give information that helps groups kind of make better decisions when they are thinking of what technology will they use and then they do implement it. This is often where kind of mistakes can be made that can be hard to rectify, that is found out after, and it can be too late. And so we were really looking for things that can help avoid some of those gaps and pitfalls and have a good review process. To do this, we kind of firstly created a framework for how to understand the different functions you need in a microgrid and how to assess different technologies against those functions. One reason we did that is currently in the space, it's very diverse, as you'd expect in any kind of new and emerging field. And so, often you can't put companies simply into a few different boxes, that it's quite diverse and varied. So that's why we developed this function. We also looked at, a few different vendors through the framework to show how it can be used and what's out there in the market. And then at the end, we kind of identify the gaps and common challenges to microgrid projects at the moment. I think that a lot of these gaps are due to the new kind of way that we use these technologies in this configuration of a microgrid. And I do expect that as this becomes more mature, as more microgrids are developed, that will stimulate businesses to provide better, kind of improved products. And so I expect that those kind of gaps to improve over time, which is kind of a good news story. So kind of breaking down these different functions, and really we broke it down to, when thinking of things you want to do, you need certain aspects. So you probably need what we call edge, which is installing things at the site that can control the systems. You need somewhere for the data to go and instructions over the internet. Let's say, you're using energy, you're recording it, you then want to look at it on an app or a dashboard, you're going to need certain kind of cloud and IT infrastructure. You probably want to use your assets intelligently. And so there are these kind of, ways of using it a little more intelligently. And the last two are really optional, where if you do want to also your microgrid to interact with the energy market, there will be some considerations to fulfill that function. And then if you want to do something what we call off market, which is peer-to-peer trading, local energy trading, certain power purchase agreements, that's also kind of another function which needs to be kind of fulfilled if you want to do those things. And so one kind of quite extreme example of applying this framework is looking at Yarra Energy Foundation. They just deployed their first neighbourhood battery in inner city Melbourne, and they kind of went and looked out for vendors and found that they needed a really modular solution. So they have Pixie as the battery supplier. They have third-party control and comms hardware to do certain things. Deciding on what that hardware was, they collaborated a lot with their partners. They elected to actually build in-house their cloud software that receives and sends information to the different parties. They use ANU and their optimizer for asset services, and then they partner with Acacia to do the wholesale market bidding and settlement and dispatch. And so this is kind of very far on the spectrum in terms of a very modular setup. This isn't always the case, but kind of gives a flavor at the moment that for some use cases there may not be just off the shelf simple solutions. You may need to do a little bit of sticking things together, or find a partner who will kind of stick things together underneath for you. So on the left side, you can see kind of a grouping of vendors where we thought, oh, these vendors can offer things that are kind of to do with microgrids. It's a scattering, and you can see on the right side, when we put them into this model, they do different functions. Some companies do multiple functions, some do single functions. Some companies who do multiple functions, you can ask them to do a single function. You can say, hey, I know you do all this fancy optimization stuff. I really just want to use your control hardware, and we're going to use somebody else for optimization. And some will say yes, some will say no. And so really what you're doing is kind of looking through each column, and you want to fill out each column with kind of a vendor and stick them together in different configurations. So yeah, just quickly in the report, we kind of cover those 5 functions and kind of questions and areas you should look for in solutions. And so, when you're thinking of your edge control infrastructure, like, will it work with new things I get? That's a really good question to ask, right? You don't want to install all this complicated equipment at the site, and then you say, hey, we want to get a heat pump, and you go to the vendor and you say, hey, can you control my heat pump as well? And they say, well, no, like here's a list and the heat pump isn't on there. That's a bad outcome. In cloud, how can I get access to certain data? Sometimes that is found after the fact that certain data that groups want to get is hard or expensive or isn't supported by the vendor. Asset services, like if people are going to do smart control, how can you know after the fact that it was smart and that there were benefits? That is sometimes a tricky question for vendors to answer. Market services, how will you kind of interact with everybody else? You're a retailer, there's going to be control systems that your partners are operating. How does that all work together? And then off-market accounting, once again, one of the potential questions that could be asked is kind of what are the benefits of doing this, and how can we do potentially feasibility studies beforehand? So these are just a kind of sample of types of questions you want to ask to avoid kind of bad outcomes. And I think as well, both for the vendors and the groups, that often kind of problems come from misunderstandings that when people do understand it's kind of too late. And so a lot of these kind of going through this process kind of better gets groups and vendors on the same page at the start of a project about what might be needed, and avoids a lot of kind of awkward and costly for both parties, both time and money later on. We also look at the vendors and kind of go through and say, hey, this is what these guys do, this is what these vendors do. It's quite interesting that vendors are quite varied. Even if you'd say, oh, all these vendors are in the same column, they all provide edge or they all provide cloud, they're quite varied in that they suit many different use cases. And I think that kind of matches the embryonic stage we're in, where we're trying out a lot of different things. And so, one thing I would say is vendors need to hit certain levels of that their things do what they say they do. But I'd also encourage kind of trying to find those vendors that fit, or their solution fits the kind of thing that you want to do. It's likely that some vendors fit a lot better than others. There are, a lot of these interactions are based on relationships between different vendors. So you go to a retailer and you say, hey, I want you to kind of help out with my microgrid. They may have some preferred hardware partners that they're good at working at. Or you may be working, oftentimes the retailer is working with a new hardware partner, and that's something that needs to be managed as well. And there is a wide amount of information publicly available on these companies. Some companies have reams and reams of documents out there that allow you to understand it. Others, you tend to need to go more down that sales path and talk to them more to get that out. And finally, kind of talking about, as I alluded to, kind of areas which we've kind of identified as gaps that can be improved upon. And once again, we expect, as there is a greater uptake of microgrids, that a lot of these gaps will be resolved over time. If one is, if you're a very large company or you have a very large project, you can go to developers who will take care of kind of engineering, procurement, and construction. Like, you kind of say what you want and they kind of do it. For smaller projects, a lot of those services aren't as available. And we found that smaller projects often have to do a lot of that legwork and project management and managing things that stick together a lot more. Data access and rights. Once again, understanding who owns the data, how can you get access to it? If it's something that they don't support currently, what is that like? Do you have to pay $50,000 for them to develop this way to get the data, or are there other options? Also rights. sometimes groups can sign up to certain, contractual obligations, get the gear in, start operating it. And then they find out afterwards, as they try and change the project or grow it or adapt it, that they may have signed up for certain, obligations, or certain parties have certain rights, which does constrain the project in what it can do. Regulatory barriers for on-grid applications. So when you're kind of behind the meter in your little microgrid with your own little wires, say in a business precinct, you have a very large a large set of options that you can do. The minute that kind of the energy flows get onto the grid, you're now kind of under a certain set of rules and regulations that can seem constraining or not as fit for purpose for microgrid applications. Simple things like if I have solar at one site and then I put a battery across the street and I charge that battery from the solar, currently you'll be charged the full distribution and transmission network charges, even though it's locally consumed. Now, there are many trials and reforms looking to kind of resolve those issues and make them more fit for purpose for microgrids, but it's something to be aware of, where there is often constraints that may seem unintuitive in how you can operate when you happen to use the actual grid as part of kind of the microgrid project. And then, a lot of the implementations of microgrids we found in the past are quite simple. We suspect that that's from both sides, that earlier projects kind of have a tighter scope, and the technology is still emerging. But we do find a lot of the kind of objectives and high values of these projects, especially around resiliency and certain community sharing models, are kind of less developed, it seems, and less rolled out. The simple kind of that the power goes out, my battery's working to power my house, that kind of works, and a lot of these technologies are kind of adapted from non-microgrid functions, right? Like a lot of these companies are like, oh yeah, we'll control your battery and solar on the grid, and we can do microgrids as well. And so currently, it's a little bit of a side functionality that many of the vendors are adapting. But once again, I think as microgrids develop more, that it will become kind of a key offering of some of really tailored products towards all the different objectives that microgrids have. So that's my kind of whistle stop tour, and hopefully that was useful.
Thanks a lot, Mitch. It sounds like a very complex area to be navigating as an end user in the different systems. And I guess some of the key things I heard while you were talking there is that there's quite a bit of relationship management, that users will need to incorporate when they're looking at these solutions. But also, I think you made a really good point about the phase that we're in is embryonic, was the word you used, and I think for users to understand that avoiding that lock-in into the new sort of services and the new markets that will open up as we go along this journey is probably pretty critical. So yeah, thanks a lot, Mitch. And Mitch's report will be publicly available pretty soon in the coming month or so. So we'll make sure that we promote that through the usual channels. So great. Thanks, Mitch. Actually, we do have one question for you, Mitch, from the audience, that just someone would like to know about the state of standards being implemented around interoperability, such as the IEEE standards. Yeah. You have anything?
Yeah. So, as DER increases in our energy system, we are, it is becoming more connected. We have more visibility of what they're going to do, and they're much more integrated into the system. And so these are some of the standards that are starting to be implemented. Right now we're kind of walking through this progress of how should we communicate with inverter-based resources and suggesting standards and developing them. And so we're in the middle stages, I'd say, and to those specific questions, the Energy Security Board is doing some interoperability work around how to deploy these standards efficiently. But as these standards come into play, it does get more complicated, that there are more costs potentially as well. And so, that's something to consider, that we're not just in a frame where this is all you have to do now and forever, that over time there's likely to be more kind of obligations, and unfortunately potentially a bit more complexity as well in how these assets are operated.
Thanks, Mitch. So just want to take a moment now and just thank all our panelists. We're sort of conscious of time, and thank obviously all the audience members for joining us today. In terms of next steps in the project, as Karen outlined, we'll be really starting to work with those community representatives through the focus groups in each area. And for anyone who's interested and either wants more information or wants to get involved, feel free to drop us a line. You can find out more information just by searching microgrids and the local government area of interest, so whether that be Wodonga or Yarra Ranges, and you should find out one of our pages on the top search links. So and also you'll be able to access the information through our Monash websites. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for the attendance today, and we look forward to meeting more of the community as we progress down this path, and updating you in the near future. Thanks a lot, everyone.